Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
Imagine walking into the restaurant where your own blood turns the table into enemy territory, their laughter slicing sharper than the steak knives, and just when you think you've swallowed the bitterness by footing the bill, a stranger's voice pulls the rug out from under them all, making you wonder if family is worth the fight or just a fancy word for payback waiting to happen. A scenario that unfolded for me one crisp autumn evening in downtown Chicago when I decided to show up uninvited to my sister Emily's so-called family reunion after years of being sidelined like an afterthought in our fractured sibling dynamic that started with Dad's uneven will and escalated through her endless snubs disguised as concern for my single, career-driven life in the city. The restaurant, a cozy Italian spot named Bella Notte with its exposed brick walls and candlelit tables that screamed old-world charm mixed with modern overpricing, buzzed with the chatter of well-heeled diners enjoying plates of veal parmigiana and glasses of Chianti that probably cost more than my weekly grocery run, and as I pushed through the heavy oak door, the scent of fresh basil and simmering tomato sauce hit me like a warm embrace I didn't deserve. Especially not after Emily had ghosted my calls following the last holiday where she paraded her picture-perfect life with husband Mark and their 2 kids while I sat alone nursing a glass of water, pretending my marketing job's long hours were a choice rather than a necessity to outrun the loneliness of being the family black sheep. Spotting them immediately in the prime corner booth, Emily at 45 looking every inch the suburban socialite in her tailored blouse and pearl earrings that Dad had gifted her exclusively. Surrounded by Aunt Linda with her perpetual martini glass half empty and half full of gossip, plus cousins Tom and Sarah who barely nodded my way during the rare family emails, I straightened my shoulders under my simple wool coat, the one hiding the figure I'd maintained through spin classes and stress eating, and approached with a forced casualness born from too many boardroom negotiations where bluffing was second nature. Sliding into the empty chair at the table's end without waiting for an invitation, I offered a tentative smile and said it's good to see you all. I caught wind of this gathering and figured it was time to reconnect after everything that's happened since Dad passed. But Emily's reaction came swift and sharp, her blue eyes narrowing in that familiar mix of surprise and disdain as she set down her fork mid-bite of her risotto, declaring with a voice laced in faux politeness that this table's for family only, why don't you try somewhere else for your little surprise visit, and the words landed like a gut punch followed by the ripple of laughter from the others. Mark chuckling deeply as if it were a well-timed sitcom line while Aunt Linda tittered behind her hand and the cousins exchanged amused glances before returning to their phones, the collective mirth amplifying the exclusion until it felt like the entire room had joined in on the joke at my expense, stirring up memories of childhood barbecues where Emily always claimed the best seat and I'd end up on the sidelines with the relatives no one wanted to claim. Swallowing the lump in my throat that tasted suspiciously like the rejection I'd internalized since Mom's death when Emily stepped into the caretaker role and I escaped to college early, I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the tiled floor in a sound that seemed louder than the ambient jazz playing overhead, and replied evenly that I understand. Enjoy your evening then. Though inwardly a spark of defiance ignited because after anonymously wiring money to cover Emily's boutique startup loan 2 years back or helping Aunt Linda with her mortgage during that rough divorce, their dismissal stung with the hypocrisy of a family that preached unity but practiced division whenever my independence threatened their narrative of me as the distant failure. As I turned toward the exit, the cool draft from the door beckoning like a sensible retreat, the waiter named Carlos, a lanky fellow in his 20s with a name tag slightly askew and an expression of quiet sympathy, intercepted me near the host stand and whispered that the group's check was coming due soon, his eyes flicking back to the booth where the laughter had subsided into murmurs of ordering dessert, and in that moment, fueled by a blend of hurt pride and the wry humor that had gotten me through tougher pitches at work, I decided to flip the script just a touch by nodding to him and saying go ahead and bring it to me. I'll handle it because leaving them to stew in their own bill might teach a lesson worth more than words. He returned promptly with the leather-bound folder, the total scrawled inside at $320, encompassing appetizers of bruschetta they barely touched. Main courses of pasta carbonara and osso buco that now seemed like overindulgent props in their theater of exclusion, plus a round of after-dinner espressos that pushed the figure higher, and I peeled off the cash from my wallet. The bills Chris from my latest commission check earned hustling ad campaigns for tech startups, sliding them over to Carlos with a calm nod and a generous tip tucked inside, because even in revenge, a little grace went a long way toward keeping one's dignity intact. The family remained oblivious at first, lost in their bubble of inside stories about neighborhood dramas and kids' soccer triumphs, but as Carlos cleared the table with efficient sweeps and I lingered by the bar pretending to check my phone, Emily glanced over, her brow furrowing in confusion that morphed into a flash of irritation when she realized what I'd done, her mouth opening as if to protest, but closing again under the weight of the awkward spotlight I'd subtly cast. Gathering my coat and stepping toward the glass doors where the city lights twinkled invitingly against the darkening sky, I felt a tentative satisfaction bubbling up, the kind that mixed vindication with the lingering ache of what family should be. Only to have it shattered when a deep voice rumbled from behind, "Hold on, miss. I think you forgot something," turning to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit emerging from the manager's office. His gaze fixed intently on Emily, who had frozen mid-sip of her limoncello, her glass trembling slightly as he extended a crumpled receipt bearing her name from an unpaid lunch tab she'd apparently racked up the week before, the revelation hanging in the air like the final note of an unfinished symphony. Leaving everyone at the table exchanging wide-eyed stares while I stood there, pulse quickening with the promise of secrets unraveling in ways none of us had anticipated. That crumpled receipt clutched in the suited man's hand transformed the cozy hum of Bella Notte into a tense tableau where every clink of silverware seemed amplified. Emily's face paling under the soft glow of the pendant lights as she snatched it from him with a forced laugh that didn't reach her eyes, insisting loudly that this must be some mix-up because she'd settled every bill in her life with the precision of a woman who balanced her checkbook before breakfast, though we both knew from our shared girlhood that her precision often meant shoving problems onto someone else, like the time she borrowed my savings for a weekend getaway and repaid me in IOUs scribbled on cocktail napkins. The man, introducing himself as Victor Ling with the steady gaze of someone who'd mediated more corporate takeovers than family spats, clarified without raising his voice that the tab stemmed from her solo lunch the previous Tuesday. A lavish affair of seared scallops and a crisp Sauvignon Blanc, totaling another $280 that she'd signed off on confidently only for the payment to bounce later due to an overdraft she must have patched up quietly. His explanation delivered with the unflappable calm of a detective laying out evidence in a dimly lit precinct, leaving the table in a stunned hush where Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, Aunt Linda's martini forgotten mid-sip, and the cousins Tom and Sarah exchanging whispers that carried just far enough to hint at their growing discomfort with the unfolding drama. Standing there by the door with my coat draped over one arm, I felt a surge of wry amusement bubbling up amidst the satisfaction of witnessing Emily's polished facade crack just a fraction. Reminiscent of those high school lunch periods when she'd deny raiding my locker for cash and blame the janitor instead, so I stepped forward smoothly, card already in hand from the earlier transaction, and told Victor to run it through again on me because turning the other cheek twice in one night seemed like the kind of ironic twist that might make this whole fiasco memorable for everyone involved. My tone light with that self-deprecating humor that masked the deeper sting of their earlier laughter still echoing in my mind like an unwelcome soundtrack. Emily's protest came quick and sharp, her cheeks flushing as she waved me off with declarations that she didn't need her little sister playing savior after years of living the high life in the city, while the rest of us scraped by in the suburbs. But I just smiled wider and quipped back that family tabs are like old grudges. They have a funny way of piling up when you least expect it, the words drawing a reluctant snort from Mark, who tried to play it off as a cough, and even a faint smirk from Aunt Linda, who appreciated the jab more than she'd admit given her own history of Emily dodging shared holiday costs. Victor processed the payment with efficient nods, the machine's beep sealing the moment like a punctuation mark on their evening's discomfort, and as he pocketed the receipt with a murmured thanks that included a lingering look my way, as if he recognized the resolve in my posture from somewhere in his past dealings. The group began to disperse awkwardly, Emily gathering her purse with jerky movements, while issuing terse goodnights that carried the weight of unspoken accusations directed squarely at me for turning her snub into a spectacle. Lingering at the bar to settle my own untouched soda, I replayed the scene in my head with a mix of vindication and that nagging pull of sibling loyalty that had me covering her messes since we were kids fighting over the last slice of pie at Grandma's Thanksgiving table. But before I could dwell too long on whether this mini-revenge qualified as closure or just another layer of resentment, Victor approached quietly and slipped me a business card embossed with his name and a discreet PI firm logo, whispering that he'd seen my face in an old file connected to our father's estate and suggested we talk soon about loose ends Emily might not want tied up. His words planting a seed of intrigue that had me nodding non-committally, while my mind raced with possibilities of hidden ledgers or forgotten promises from Dad's consulting days. The drive home through Chicago's glittering nightlife blurred into a haze of streetlights and honking taxis, my apartment's quiet welcome at a stark contrast to the restaurant's chaos, and as I kicked off my heels and poured a nightcap of herbal tea to unwind, the satisfaction from exposing that small family lie about Emily's flawless finances felt cleverly satisfying yet incomplete, like scratching an itch only to find it spread further, especially when my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number just past midnight, the voice on the other end deep and familiar in a way that sent chills racing down my spine as it said, "Rachel, it's time you knew about the letter your father left for you. The one that could change everything." Emily's built on sand, leaving me gripping the counter with questions swirling about what leverage this stranger held and whether using it would finally balance the scales or shatter the fragile remnants of our family bond beyond repair. That midnight call about Dad's letter pulled me from the edge of sleep like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. The voice on the other end gravelly and measured as it identified itself as Hal from the old consulting firm where Dad had spent his final decades juggling client portfolios and tax loopholes with the finesse of a man who always kept one card hidden up his sleeve, explaining over the crackle of a poor connection that the document in question wasn't just a sentimental note but a detailed codicil amending his will to redistribute certain offshore assets Emily had conveniently overlooked during the estate settlement 5 years prior. Assets tied to Dad's side ventures in real estate flips that could have balanced the scales between her windfall of the family home in Oak Park and my paltry inheritance of vague stock options that barely covered a down payment on my condo. Sitting there in the dim glow of my bedside lamp with the city skyline pressing against the window like a silent witness to my unraveling night, I probed hell for details without committing to anything, my mind flashing back to the funeral parlor where Emily had orchestrated the reading with lawyers on speed dial. Her tears genuine enough to sway Aunt Linda, but her quick pivot to claiming the house as emotional compensation for being the dutiful daughter who stayed local while I chased promotions in high-rises. A narrative that painted me as the absentee opportunist even though I'd been the one wiring emergency funds during Mom's chemo treatments when Emily's boutique ate up all her disposable income. Hal's reluctance to dive deeper over the phone stemmed from his own tangled loyalties, having retired under a cloud after Dad's passing when audits revealed some creative accounting that Emily had pinned on him to protect the family's image. So he suggested meeting at our old haunt, the corner diner on Halstead Street where the coffee was bottomless and the booths worn from decades of confessions, a place that held memories of Dad treating us to pancakes after school and Emily always ordering extra syrup to drown out the bitterness of sharing the spotlight with me. By morning, after a fitful few hours replaying Victor's business card and the restaurant's charged atmosphere in my dreams, I arrived at the diner amid the clatter of breakfast rush, Hal already hunched over a mug with steam curling like unspoken regrets. And as he slid a manila envelope across the Formica table stamped with faded firm letterhead, he outlined how the codicil named me as trustee for those hidden funds precisely because Dad distrusted Emily's spending habits after she maxed out credit cards on European vacations during his illness, funds I'd discovered 2 years ago and chosen to funnel anonymously back into the family, covering Aunt Linda's medical copays during her hip surgery and even bailing out Emily's shop from bankruptcy whispers without a single thank you or acknowledgement. Decisions that now struck me as naively generous, the kind that kept the door cracked for reconciliation, but invited more slams in the face like the one at dinner. Hal's eyes softened when he revealed Victor's true role as Dad's longtime poker companion turned private eye, hired quietly by our father to monitor Emily's finances after suspicions of her dipping into joint accounts, a twist that explained the manager's knowing glance and the receipt's timely appearance, making my heart race with the realization that my subtle request for Victor to keep tabs months back had snowballed into this web of surveillance without me fully grasping the implications. Empowered by the envelope's weight in my bag, I drove straight to Emily's pristine colonial in the suburbs, the manicured lawn and minivan in the driveway a testament to the stability she'd built on foundations I'd unknowingly shored up. And when she answered the door in yoga pants and a scowl that deepened at the sight of me, I held up the envelope without preamble and said, "We need to discuss Dad's real intentions before your perfect life starts crumbling under the weight of what you've ignored." Her invitation inside grudging, but laced with a flicker of fear that betrayed the cracks in her armor. The living room, cluttered with framed photos of family outings that conveniently cropped me out, became the arena for our confrontation where Emily denied every accusation from the codicil's clauses to the anonymous transfers I'd made out of some misplaced sense of duty, her voice rising in that defensive cadence reminiscent of our teen arguments over curfews when she'd lie about where she'd been and I'd cover for her to avoid Mom's wrath, but as tempers flared and Mark hovered awkwardly in the doorway pretending to check emails, I let slip the truth about the money trails during a heated exchange over her boutique's near collapse, watching her face cycle through shock, denial, and a grudging admission that maybe she'd suspected a guardian angel, but never dreamed it was the sister she dismissed as too self-absorbed for sentiment. In that vulnerable beat, with sunlight slanting through the blinds like judgment rays, I could have pressed for repayment or exposed the codicil to the lawyers right then. A satisfying revenge that would have leveled the playing field with witty precision by turning her exclusions back on her. But instead I chose the path of uneasy truce, pocketing the envelope and saying perhaps we can sort this privately like family should, though the words tasted like compromise wrapped in cowardice, leaving me to drive away with a hollow victory that only amplified the internal tug-of-war between justice and the ghosts of our shared blood. The afternoon blurred into errands that did little to quiet the doubts, my phone silent until evening when a text from Emily arrived unexpectedly, reading, "I know what you've done with the money. Meet me tomorrow or it all comes out your way too." The threat hanging like a storm cloud over the fragile peace I'd just brokered, forcing me to wonder if Victor's warnings had been prophetic and whether diving deeper into this family quagmire would unearth salvation or bury us all in the secrets Dad left behind. Emily's threatening text about the money and the codicil lingered on my phone screen like a digital ultimatum that turned my quiet evening into a whirlwind of second-guessing every anonymous wire transfer I'd made over the years. The kind of impulsive generosity born from memories of us, as kids pooling allowance for ice cream runs where she'd always take the bigger cone and I'd pretend not to notice. But now with the stakes involving Dad's hidden assets that could upend her suburban empire, I felt the pull of that old dynamic twisting into something sharper and more precarious as I paced my apartment overlooking the churning waters of Lake Michigan, the waves mirroring the turmoil of deciding whether to call her bluff or escalate with the evidence Hal had provided in a way that might finally force accountability without dragging the entire family through the mud of public scandal. By the next morning, after a night of tossing with dreams haunted by Victor's enigmatic card and the restaurant's charged silences, I arrived at Emily's door again unannounced, the envelope from Hal tucked securely in my bag like a loaded ace I wasn't quite ready to play. And when she opened up with arms crossed over her chest in a defensive posture that screamed unresolved resentment, I pushed past the pleasantries and said, "Look, if you're going to threaten me with exposure, Let's hash it out face to face instead of hiding behind texts like we're still teenagers fighting over the bathroom. Mirror, her reluctant nod leading us to the kitchen island where coffee steamed in mugs that matched the pristine counters. A domestic scene undercut by the undercurrent of betrayal simmering just below the surface, as she admitted in halting words that she'd pieced together my financial interventions from bank alerts and now saw them as manipulations rather than the lifelines I'd intended them to be during her boutique's near failures and Aunt Linda's health scares. The confrontation stretched into an hour of back and forth where Emily accused me of playing the martyr to undermine her role as the family's anchor, her voice cracking with a mix of hurt pride and genuine fear over losing the house that Dad had willed her as a symbol of his favor, while I countered with details from the codicil that outlined how those offshore funds were meant to support all of us equally, not just fund her lifestyle of PTA meetings and country club brunches, injecting a touch of humor by quipping that if I'd wanted to play puppet master, I'd have at least demanded a shout-out in her holiday cards instead of watching from the sidelines like some invisible benefactor. As tempers cooled into an uneasy stalemate with Mark peeking in from the garage offering neutral grunts about needing to mow the lawn, I left with a promise to think on her proposal of splitting the assets quietly. But the drive back through the leafy suburbs to the city's pulse had me fuming at my own hesitation, the dilemma gnawing. Because full disclosure right then would have been the satisfying revenge of watching her scramble like she made me do at that dinner, yet holding back felt like preserving a thread of sisterhood frayed, but not fully severed. A choice that probably frustrated anyone hearing the story for its apparent softness in the face of such calculated slights. Fueled by that internal conflict, I pulled over at a coffee shop midway home and drafted a social media post on my laptop. Nothing overt like a direct accusation, but a cleverly veiled meme featuring a cartoon of a diner tab left unpaid with a caption about how family debts have a way of resurfacing at the worst dinners, laced with nostalgic references to our childhood spots that only those in the know would connect to Emily's recent oversights, the witty sabotage designed to stir whispers among her boutique's online clientele without crossing into outright libel, my finger hovering over the publish button as laughter escaped at the irony of using her favorite platform against her polished image. Posting it felt like a small triumph when the likes started trickling in from mutual acquaintances, the innuendo spreading like subtle ripples that I imagined reaching her phone during some afternoon errands, and sure enough, her call came within the hour. Voice shrill with demands to delete it immediately or face consequences, but I replied calmly with a chuckle that this was just payback for the laughs she got at my expense, hanging up before she could retort and savoring the momentary power shift that made the hesitation earlier seem almost strategic rather than weak-kneed. The afternoon wore on with me fielding curious texts from Aunt Linda wondering if the post alluded to old family stories, her tone probing yet supportive in a way that hinted she suspected Emily's role in the will's imbalances. And as I prepared a simple dinner of takeout stir-fry in my kitchen, the satisfaction from the online jab began to sour into regret. When Victor texted an update about digging deeper into Emily's accounts, revealing patterns of loans taken against the house that tied back to Dad's firm in ways the codicil hadn't anticipated, his message ending with a caution that a legal notice was en route to all parties involved, the words sending a jolt through me because if this document surfaced publicly, it wouldn't just threaten Emily's stability, but pull me into the vortex as the named trustee, forcing a reckoning I wasn't prepared for, with the family's secrets unraveling faster than I could stitch them back together. Victor's warning about the incoming legal notice transformed my evening routine of mindless scrolling and leftover stir-fry into a frantic review of the codicil's fine print under the harsh light of my desk lamp. The document's clauses outlining my trusteeship over Dad's hidden assets now feeling less like a safeguard and more like a ticking bomb that could explode Emily's carefully curated life of soccer mom obligations and boutique brunches into a cascade of audits and family court dates, prompting me to draft a measured email to her suggesting one last sit-down at Bella Notte to negotiate terms before the lawyers turned our private squabbles into public record. A proposal laced with the subtle humor of returning to the scene of her initial snub, as if we could rewrite the script with me holding the pen this time. Her reply came swift and surprisingly conciliatory, agreeing to meet the following evening with the family in tow because, as she put it in terse words, some things can't be fixed over text or memes, the concession hinting at the pressure building from her own investigations into the social media ripples I'd started, which had already cost her a few loyal customers whispering about unpaid favors in the comments sections of her carefully curated posts. Arriving at the restaurant the next night with the envelope from Hal clutched in my bag like a talisman against the uncertainties swirling in my gut, I found the corner booth occupied once more by the full ensemble. Emily in a subdued sweater that toned down her usual flair, Mark fiddling with his napkin rings, Aunt Linda nursing a soda instead of her signature martini, and the cousins Tom and Sarah looking distinctly out of place, as if dragged there against their better judgment, the air thick with the familiar aromas of garlic bread and simmering sauces that now carried an underlayer of tension palpable enough to curdle the cream in their coffees. Sliding into the seat without fanfare, I opened with a light quip that this table must have a revolving door policy for family these days, drawing a strained chuckle from Mark and a tight-lipped nod from Emily, who wasted no time in sliding a handwritten note across the table proposing we split the assets 60-40 in her favor to cover the house's equity she'd poured into renovations. Her eyes pleading in a way that evoked our childhood pacts sealed with pinky promises over shared secrets, but I countered by laying out the codicil's true intent, explaining how Dad had envisioned equal shares to prevent the very divisions that had us here now, injecting a touch of wry observation that if he'd foreseen her boutique's black holes, he might have added clauses for impulse shopping limits. The discussion meandered into deeper waters as Aunt Linda chimed in with her own grievances about overlooked medical reimbursements from the funds, her voice gaining strength in the solidarity of the moment and prompting Emily to fidget with her phone, perhaps checking the latest fallout from my online nudge that had escalated into forum threads questioning the ethics of family business dealings, a development that made me inwardly smirk at the clever escalation while questioning if my hand in it bordered on the vindictive side of justice. As desserts arrived unbidden, tiramisu slices that no one touched, Victor materialized from the kitchen like a shadow given form, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs with a polite announcement that he was there as a neutral witness per Dad's old arrangements, handing over a slim folder containing bank records and a notarized affidavit detailing Emily's unauthorized dips into the accounts, the evidence presented not with accusation, but with the measured tone of a man tying loose ends for an audience that included the waiter Carlos hovering nearby with wide eyes, turning the intimate booth into a makeshift tribunal where Emily's denials crumbled under the weight of timestamps, matching her boutique's cash flow crises. In that charged hush, with the restaurant's ambient chatter fading into background noise, I orchestrated the final twist by revealing the anonymous transfers I'd made, not as leverage for gain, but as proof of my enduring commitment despite the slights. A confession that softened Aunt Linda's gaze and even elicited a mumbled apology from Mark, but Emily's reaction mixed resentment with a flicker of reluctant gratitude that made the air feel electric with unresolved emotions, leading me to propose a compromise where she repaid the siphoned amounts gradually while I stepped back as trustee, the witty capstone coming when I added that next time she wants to exclude someone from the table, she might want to check if they're holding the checkbook to the family vault. The evening wound down with handshakes that felt tentative and loaded, Emily's parting hug awkward, but genuine in its brevity as we stepped into the crisp night air where cab lights streaked like shooting stars, leaving me to hail one homeward with a cocktail of satisfaction and lingering doubt because while the revenge had unfolded cleverly through exposure and negotiation rather than outright destruction, the ambiguities persisted like echoes in an empty hall. Would this mending hold against future fractures, or had I merely postponed the inevitable rift by choosing mercy over the full measure of payback? Questions that swirled unanswered as the city lights blurred past, inviting anyone who heard this tale to ponder the true cost of family ties woven from secrets and second chances.